wonderful thing that he says, that international NGOs collectively are not conduits from the people, from the bottom up. Rather, they are a vehicle for international elites to talk to other international elites about the things that international elites care about. And that is indeed the concern. So now, when you've got northern initiation, this kind of leads to the next question. Then. So when is it that northern initiation might occur? And what I suggest is that northern initiation could occur for very similar reasons to southern initiation. Basically, northern NGOs can encounter northern policy blockages and find themselves unable to persuade the appropriate policymakers to advance their agenda. In fact, this is very similar to what Sarah was just talking about. So you have this sort of context. There may be any number of reasons why northern policymakers may be skeptical about their homegrown NGOs as they seek to advance a quote-unquote global agenda. And certainly some of the things that I've seen in my own research, reading dialogues between northern policymakers and each other, and northern policymakers and international NGOs, is that there's a sense or concern that sometimes international NGOs lack accountability or representativity. There's skepticism regarding exactly how global their campaigns are. There's Washington, kind of policymakers saying things like Washington D.C. NGOs are not global civil society. There's a sense of perhaps of a lack of moral authority, particularly when you are seeking to have impacts that really don't rebound to you or to your situation. There's a sense of moral hazard. And a real question regarding whether or not NGOs have the popular support that they claim to have. They may say, I'm here to campaign on behalf of the people of Brazil, but if you don't have a Brazilian on the team, it's really hard to substantiate that claim. So as a result, northern NGOs may recruit southern partners, and by recruit I really mean partners who are not previously active in the issue, to undertake advocacy and participate in this global campaign. So you reach out to local NGOs that may become interested. And what I write in the paper is that this is similar to, I'm kind of inverting some of Clifford Bobb's thinking on the marketing of rebellion, where developing country NGOs reach out to international partners who are not working on the issue yet, but could become interested. They're predisposed. And likewise here, these are southern partners who might not be working on the specific issue yet, but they are potentially predisposed. And so you reach out to them, and then you have a combined campaign that renews your lobbying of northern policymakers with some increased weight because you seem to have public support or moral authority. So this is what it looks like. You've got your international NGO that encounters its local policy blockage. It reaches out to local NGO partners, and then it has a renewed global campaign that in theory is going to influence international policymakers. So that's the model. And then the next question that I was posing, and I know sometimes it's difficult to tackle two questions in one paper, so I hope you'll bear with me, is this in fact more common in the EU? And my initial thought was that, well, it really ought to be. We know that the EU, with its multi-level governance structure, provides substantial opportunities for NGO engagement. And in fact, Justin was talking about this in the opening address. I mean, there's really a lot of opportunities for NGO engagement. And the literature also indicates that EU policymakers, particularly MEPs, are susceptible to domestic political pressure. I mean, like politicians, I should say, everywhere, they face election campaigns. And so I thought, well, maybe if civil society organizations can rally supporters behind a kind of legitimate or global campaign, they would be quite successful in gathering particularly sort of MEP support. And there are certainly these inverse boomerang campaigns. They have been very successful sometimes in developing large-scale, global-scale campaigns that seem very legitimate. I mean, you think of all of the Students for a Free Tibet stuff that came out of a lot of the lobbying around the China Western Project, and I think you had, I don't remember now, Pearl Jam performing somewhere in Eastern Europe with their kind of Free Tibet concerts and all of this stuff. And really there is some sense of, well, the Tibetans are against all of these things that are happening, in particular vis-a-vis this World Bank project. There's a sense of, well, the Tibetans are against it. But I mean, the issue is that there were Tibetans that were in London that were claiming that they had support on the ground from local Tibetans that actually nobody was ever able to identify. So So this was kind of one hypothesis, and really the hypothesis that I favored, was that EU policymakers would be more susceptible to these kind of globalized campaigns. But there was a countervailing thread in the literature, which is that EU policymakers have a relatively specific remit, which is to address European issues. And so I thought, well, there's an alternative possibility, which is that as you globalize a campaign, you might make it seem less European and less likely to fall within the remit of EU policymakers. So these are some things that I was thinking about. I selected a series of most likely cases. So there were a half dozen cases that were identifiable in the literature, and I thought I wanted to work with the cases that were in the literature because rather than bringing in, because there was already quite a bit of data there. And I can elaborate on these cases if there are questions during Q&A, but we're a little bit towards the end of the time here, so I can provide more specifics on these later if you like. But I looked at these most likely cases to see, well, what's happening in these cases? These are cases where I really expected civil society organizations to be effective in lobbying the EU and EU policymakers to be favorably disposed. And these were the things that I found. The first is that European NGOs, of course, do use the inverse boomerang strategy. There are at times that they encounter northern blockages, and they do respond to that with southern recruitment. And that in many cases, the inverse boomerang does enhance campaign effectiveness. It does improve the perception of representativity and accountability, and that across a wide range of NGOs, this strategy is used, which suggests that it's very intuitive. And my concerns, I found, were largely upheld insofar as the agenda really is chosen by northern actors and represents northern actors' interests, and the issues tend to be framed according to northern perspectives and sensibilities. I mean, I think, for instance, in the international campaign to ban landmines, there's actually some very explicit discussion by advocates in the literature basically saying we needed photo ops. Involving people from Angola and Cambodia was about allowing policymakers to see visually the impacts of the policy. It really had very little to do with getting those stakeholders involved in the policymaking or advocacy process. So, I mean, at some level, you're really reducing people in developing countries to props, and that's quite a danger. And then, of course, once you do that, you really have very little accountability. I mean, the Southern Role and Partner selection is minimized, and the campaign goes back to the North, and Southern partners are kind of left without the opportunity to judge or critique. Now, that being said, I didn't find that it was actually very effective for engaging with EU policymakers. While it is effective in mobilizing popular pressure, and this can help EU NGOs in successfully lobbying a group like, say, the World Bank, it does not, within the EU, seem to result in policymaker alignment or support. Basically, the EU-focused remit of MEPs and bureaucrats seem to lead to low levels of alignment. And in fact, in a couple of cases, there seem to be instances where the international campaign actually elicits pushback from policymakers rather than greater support. The exception is where the call to action is linked to European identity, and there are a couple of instances in which that is the case. And again, I can elaborate on those more later if anybody's interested. And these things are all in the paper as well. So a few final implications here. What I suggest is that the dynamics of north-south campaign formation likely exists on a spectrum. It's not just all the traditional boomerang model of advocacy, nor is it all the inverse boomerang. Rather, you have these two things as perhaps poles on either end. One is the completely Southern-initiated kind of pure and moral transnational advocacy network, and the other being the perhaps potentially quite manipulative northern inverse boomerang. And probably many campaigns are situated somewhere along this spectrum, reflecting different degrees of partner empowerment. But what I would also suggest is that the location that you have on the spectrum is determinant of the ultimate sort of outcome and function of the campaign. Sometimes in the literature there's a discussion, even in Kekin Seeking's original work, there's some discussion about why is it that Southerners seem to quote-unquote lose control of the campaigns that they seem to have initiated. And what I suggest in my work is that actually when Southerners seem to lose control, we need to ask, did they ever have control to begin with? So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we have about 40 minutes for question and answers, and I'm sure some of you have some questions. Yes, please. Just a second. Dr. Aras, okay. Mic. Thank you.
ourselves?
Yes, why not?
Okay. Astrid Haras from FIU. Thank you so much to the participants. I really learned so much from you guys, especially coming from an area Latin America. I'm learning from you guys. I have a couple of questions. One is for Fiacre. I really appreciated your critique to westernized frameworks to understand civil society in Africa. I appreciate that. And I really learned from your explanation how civil society is different, the state of civil society in Rwanda. And then I have several questions for you, because I'm learning from you guys today. I was fascinated with all the politics of funding civil society from Europe to other areas of the world. And then my question is, how can we problematize these politics? What is the agenda? What do they want? What European Union do they want from these organizations, civil society? What is the criteria for choosing these places where they're going to invest the money? Are they really democratic in the funding of these societies? Are they emphasizing some regions, prioritizing some regions and not others, and why? And also, I really like when you said that the support is really supporting services and not advocacy. Would you say that's the same all over Africa, or it's just particular to the Rwandan case? And then for Sarah, I really learned, I loved your Irish case. And then I was wondering whether, since the panel is beyond Europe, could you apply the same variables that you have chosen to understand the Irish case to another organization or interest group in the US, for example, going outside of Europe? For example, environmental interest groups. Or would you say that they're different and they have different motivations, strategies, and tactics? And I'll leave it at that. And later, if there's more time, I'll ask you something. But thank you so much. You first?
Sure. Thank you very much for your interest in this discussion, which is really complex. But from the starting point which you raised, so what does the EU want by going to Africa and funding this? And what are the criteria for choosing this? So what drives their good intentions through civil society? And it's a good question. So I guess, as I started in the beginning, there's beauty in making civil society work. So in French, there's actually French called this idea of allowing this bridge between citizens and the state. So it's really, there's a big literature on state-society relations. So they call it intermedia or intermediary institutions. So by allowing civil society play this medium between citizens who often are there represented by a government, but sometimes this government does not really consult with them. So it should do so through these people who call themselves bridging entities or bodies called civil society. So in the European or Western understanding of these state-society relations, and then again, which starts as a community or grassroots phenomena, it also expands at the global government. So the more we have represented citizens and a government which listens to people and which consults with them, which does not impose on its own agenda. So there's beauty in this whole idea, and it's democracy. It contributes to global peace. So when European Union invests 5 billion euros for just in a matter of 8 years, I mean, there is something out there substantial. It's very important for them, and also EU-Africa relations does not really has existed since a long time. So Africa, EU, Europe, they have these partnering relationships. And so EU, when they do that, they have it's not only in Rwanda and how do they choose or pick a country. I mean, it's everywhere. EU has partnership. Now we're in the US and we're speaking about EU's influence around the globe. So it's this idea of global interaction. So you need cooperation through different means. It's better to talk than not to talk, and we can then via these circuits of interactions we can solve different differences and solve problems and learn about one another and do more things. So in my talk I was more interested not in critiquing European whole idea of civil society or exporting civil society, more than really showing the challenges of working in Africa that they are facing. So they are problems. And we've had this debate going on since third wave and even before. And since the work of Alman and Verka, we're really privileged to work on civic culture. So as the world is now rapidly entering into a new era where we're going to experience democratizations and all as these new African states are entering into a decolonization phase. So we were hoping that the entire world was going to be democratic. And now here we are, we're still talking about what can bring about democracy. Maybe civil society will make it work. So that's really where I was coming from. And I was showing there are challenges and the problem gets complicated when you look at, as an African and also as a student of Africa. So I see the challenges and having been in NGOs and being on the field and looking at the politics really and the difficulty when you deploy such a huge amount of money to aid citizens and empower them, but they have to go through a series of steps, and which really does not end up helping or empowering citizens to the degree which was hoped from the beginning, then there are problems. So in terms of advocacy of service delivery,